Does it matter? I took a deep breath. Not really. I paused. But I am curious. My voice at least was composed. He was suddenly resigned. What are you curious about? How old are you? 17, he answered promptly. And how long have you been 17? His lips twitched as he stood at the road. A while, he admitted at last. Okay, I smiled, pleased that he was still being honest with me. He stared down at me with watchful eyes, much as he had before when he was worried I would go into shock. I smiled wilder in encouragement, and he frowned. Don't laugh. But how can you come out during the daytime? He laughed anyway. Myth. Burned by the sun? Myth. Sleeping in coffins? Myth. He hesitated for a moment, and a peculiar tone entered his voice. I can't sleep. It took me a minute to absorb that. At all? Never. He said, his voice nearly inaudible. He turned to look at me with a wistful expression. The golden eyes held mine, and I lost my train of thought. I stared at him until he looked away. You haven't asked me the most important question yet. His voice was hard now, and when he looked at me again, his eyes were cold. I blinked, still dazed. Which one is that? You aren't concerned about my diet? He asked sarcastically. Oh, I murmured, that. Yes, that. His voice was bleak. Don't you want to know if I drink blood? I flinched. Well, Jacob said something about that. What did Jacob say? He asked flatly. He said you didn't hunt people. He said your family wasn't supposed to be dangerous because you only hunted animals. He said we weren't dangerous. His voice was deeply skeptical. Not exactly. He said you weren't supposed to be dangerous. But the Quileute still didn't want you on their land just in case. He looked forward, but I couldn't tell if he was watching the road or not. So was he right about not hunting people? I tried to keep my voice as even as possible. The Quileutes have a long memory, he whispered. I took it as a confirmation. Don't let that make you complacent, though, he warned me. They're right to keep their distance from us. We're still dangerous. I don't understand. We try, he explained slowly. We're usually very good at what we do. Sometimes we make mistakes. Me, for example, allowing myself to be alone with you. This is a mistake? I heard the sadness in my voice, but I didn't know if he could as well. A very dangerous one, he murmured. We were both silent then. I watched the headlights twist with the curves of the road. They moved too fast. It didn't look real. It looked like a video game. I was aware of the time slipping away so quickly that the black road beneath us, and I was hideously afraid that I would never have a chance to be with him like this again, openly, the walls between us gone for once. His words hinted at an end, and I recoiled from the idea. I couldn't waste 1 minute I had with him. Tell me more, I asked desperately, not caring what he said, just so I can hear his voice again. He looked at me quickly, startled by the change in my tone. What more do you want to know? Tell me why you hunt animals instead of people, I suggested. My voice was still tinged with desperation. I realized my eyes were wet, and I fought against the grief that was trying to overpower me. I don't want to be a monster. His voice was very low. But animals aren't enough? He paused. I can't be sure, of course, but I compare it to living off of tofu and soy milk. We call ourselves vegetarians, our little inside joke. It doesn't completely satiate the hunger, or rather, thirst, but it keeps us strong enough to resist, most of the time. His tone turned ominous. Sometimes it's more difficult than others. Is it very difficult for you now? I asked. He sighed. Yes, but you're not hungry now, I said confidently, stating not asking. Why do you think that? Your eyes. I told you I had a theory. I noticed that people, men in particular, are crabbier when they're hungry. He chuckled. You are observant, aren't you? I didn't answer. I just listened to the sound of his laugh, committing it to memory. Were you hunting this weekend with Emmett? I asked when it was quiet again. Yes. He paused for a second, as if deciding whether or not to say something. I didn't want to leave, but it was necessary. It's a bit easier to be around you when I'm not thirsty. Why didn't you want to leave? It makes me anxious to be away from you. His eyes were gentle but intense, and they seemed to be making my bones turn soft. I wasn't joking when I asked you not to try to fall into the ocean or get run over last Thursday. I was distracted all weekend worrying about you. And after what happened tonight, I'm surprised that you did make it through a whole weekend unscathed. He shook his head and then seemed to remember something. Well, not totally unscathed. What? Your hands, he reminded me. I looked down at my palms, at the almost healed scrapes across the heels of my hands. His eyes missed nothing. I fell, I sighed. That's what I thought. His lips curved up at the corners. I suppose, being you, it could have been much worse. And that possibility tormented me the entire time I was away. It was a very long 3 days. I really got on Emmett's nerves. He smiled ruefully at me. 3 days? Didn't you just get back today? No, we got back Sunday. Then why weren't any of you at school? I was frustrated, almost angry as I thought about how much disappointment I had suffered because of his absence. Well, you asked if the sun hurt me, and it doesn't. But I can't go out into the sunlight, at least not where anyone could see. Why? I'll show you sometime, he promised. I thought about it for a moment. You might have called me, I decided. He was puzzled. But I knew you were safe.